Question number 2, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his statement last week that, quote, "we're starting to come out of the recession," end quote? If so, why?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes. Treasury predicts that the economy is in the last quarter of negative growth. It is in a purely technical sense, that means that we are at the end of the recession. However, we are by no means out of the woods. It will be some time before GDP recovers to previous levels, and for most people the measure of a recession is whether or not they have a job. As I've said many times, unemployment will continue to rise over the next year before peaking and beginning to fall again. That is the consequence of a very long recession which began under the previous Labor government.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Does his plan to come out of the recession include the appointment as chair to the Productivity Task Force of Don Brash, who says of his agenda that everything is on the table, including privatisation, notwithstanding the assurances to the contrary that the Prime Minister gave during the election campaign?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, well, the National Party Cabinet sets the agenda, and the National Party Cabinet decides the policies. And for the term of this government, there will be no privatisation. Yes, I think Dr Brash, in leading the 2025 Commission, can actually play a part in helping narrow that wage gap. And goodness knows this country needs a help, because after 9 years of Labor we went in one direction, and that was backwards compared to Australia.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Why did he, as recently as on Q&A on Sunday, repeatedly refuse to rule out privatisation as part of his agenda, despite his assurances that he wouldn't be privatising before the election?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I urge the member to go and read the transcript on Q&A. And what I correctly said was, I have never said I'm philosophically opposed to asset sales. Well, I'm not. I've simply said it doesn't form part of our agenda for this term. And if we change our policy for future terms, we'll campaign on it and be upfront about it.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, supplementary question.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Does he accept that for tens of thousands of New Zealanders, far from coming out of recession, they will be thrown out of work over the next 12 months? And does he intend to do anything to alleviate the genuine hardship, including loss of home, that many of those people are facing?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I can't tell the member how many people will lose their job over the next year or so. Treasury have predictions. Treasury have lots of predictions, and some of them are right and some of them are wrong, I'm afraid to tell the member. The second thing I'd say is the government is doing as much as it possibly can, I believe, to try and help people through a recession, which is a global recession that started in the United States of America. This government has done everything from bringing forward infrastructure spending to things like a home insulation package, to reform of the RMA, to reform of the emissions trading scheme legislation, to removing regulation, to working on reform of local governance in Auckland, tax cuts of $1 billion in April, and it goes on and on and on. And yes, there will be some people that lose their job, and this government will do everything we can to try and help them into a new job.
Chris Tremaine.
Supplementary. To the Prime Minister, what assistance does work and income offer, in addition to main benefits, for people who find themselves in hardship during the recession?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the answer to that question is it provides assistance well over $1 billion. I'm advised that work and income provides a wide range of assistance to people in need, including to people who are not receiving any sort of main benefit. The assistance includes job search services, the accommodation supplement, child and OSCA subsidies, transition to work grants, temporary additional support, special need grants and recoverable assistance payments. I'm advised that the government spends $1 billion alone on the accommodation supplement and $300 million on hardship assistance. they are available to people who do not qualify for a main benefit.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. What does he say to his own constituent, Bruce Burgess, whose story is told in the Herald this morning, who has saved and worked all of his life, has never asked the state in his life for welfare assistance, but now at age 63 has lost his job, risks losing his home, and is eligible for no transitional assistance because his wife earns a very modest income?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I'd say a number of things. Firstly, I'd urge Mr Burgess to go into work and income for an assessment. If he does that, then work and income may be able to help him into one of the 100... Just listen for a second, because you might learn something. He might be eligible to one of the 144 engineering jobs available. Secondly, according to the facts as stated in the New Zealand Herald, Mr Burgess would be eligible for a partial benefit, $91.20 a week. And the third thing, $91.20 a week. And the third thing I'd say to Mr Goff is this, is that just before he starts playing politics with a constituent of mine, I strongly suggest to him that he make sure that he's in receipt of all the information.
Chris Tremaine. Order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Order.
To the Prime Minister.
Order.
To the Prime Minister.
Order. Order. I have called Chris Tremaine. Please show the member some courtesy. Chris Tremaine.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister. What correspondence has he or other ministers had with Mr Burgess?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
A family member of Mr Burgess made contact with my office, and I asked the Minister of Social Development to respond. The Minister's office asked the family member for Mr Burgess's details so they could see what assistance he might be entitled to. The family member did not supply any of the details needed, including Mr Burgess's name, so it was impossible to look into the situation. Following this morning's media coverage, Work and Income has been able to identify and make contact with Mr Burgess and receive all of the facts. I would encourage him to sit down with Work and Income and have a full assessment of his individual circumstances, and I would urge Mr Goff to make sure he understands all the facts when he starts dealing with a situation of an individual constituent.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Don't look like that.
Order. No, order. I now ask members to show a little courtesy to the Leader of the Opposition, who I've called. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Why did he answer in the House yesterday that a person who has been made redundant and who has a spouse earning $26,000 a year is eligible for financial support for job search or retraining when they aren't?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
He doesn't know his facts.
Mr Speaker, because it's correct.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. I didn't hear the Prime Minister's answer. Could he please repeat it?
I invite the
Speaker,
Prime
because
Minister.
it's correct.
I thank the Honourable Prime Minister.
Correct.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Further supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Why was it possible, at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars, to legislate for tax cuts last December, which would have given people on high incomes, including the Prime Minister, hundreds of dollars a week in tax cuts, but it's not possible to provide short-term transitional support for job search or for retraining for people who are suffering genuine hardship through no fault of their own, that have been taxpayers all their life?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, firstly, because it was a lot better idea than giving welfare to millionaires, as Phil Goff was suggesting on Monday. But actually, no rush. And then the second reason, because actually, let's understand what happened here. The National Party in opposition put up a proposal to provide transitional support to those most in need in this country. It's called the Restart Package, and we did it on top of the $300 million that's available for hardship assistance, the $150 million that's available on childcare assistance, the $1 billion that's available under accommodation supplements. Mr Speaker, we are doing what we can to help those most vulnerable in the community.